we should be, I'm sorry for this. My team just wrote this in the...
It says
it's running.
It's running? It's running. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're running. We're live and running. Welcome also everyone on YouTube. We're just getting started, and I would like to start the session with a question for Carrie Facer. And I mentioned the report you wrote, that very interesting report. What's your assessment on how climate change will change and affect the business of universities, and what should universities and higher education institutions, what's the responsibility of these institutions in times of climate change?
Okay, so thanks ever so much for the introduction. And I think your figures about that temperature change just really bring home to us the fact that climate change is not a future problem, it's a situation that we're living in at the moment, and that the situation is extremely serious. The situation, as far as I analyse it and most other people, is that we're going to need a civilizational change. My view is that universities are at the heart of our civilizations. That's what they're doing. They are reproducing our ideas of what our values are, what our knowledge is, how we're going to live and work. And so therefore, any serious strategy for transition has to really mobilize universities. Now, my concern is that universities themselves are not yet quite aware that this is what their job is. They are, I think we can be proud in our universities of the work that we've done alongside Indigenous communities in identifying and understanding the nature of the problem. Okay, so that's been our contribution. But for too long, we've relied on our scientific and our research knowledge being the contribution that we've made. And actually, we need to think much more widely. And my view is we have 4 key areas in which universities have to make a contribution. Firstly, in their own practices, in their material organization. How are universities using their buildings, their land? How are they transporting themselves? How do they see their identity as producers of carbon emissions and in relation to biodiversity? Secondly, in their civic role, their relationship in working with cities, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more, so I won't talk about it in detail now. Thirdly, in their research role, which is more familiar to us, but I think there's a much more urgent need for us to think about the relationship between research and the sort of civilizational shift around climate change. And finally, in relation to our students, what sort of offer are we making to our students if we are not seriously thinking about how we support them to live, to reimagine themselves, to reimagine the work that they will do, and to address the really profound emotional and personal issues that are involved with taking climate change seriously. So my view is that there's those 4 levels, and I'll stop there and we can carry on with the conversation.
Well, thanks a lot, and I think that each of these 4 areas would merit its own discussion. We'll just see what we get today. So Uwe, you've recently put forward, and I'd like that very much, the idea that academic research and teaching should be at least partially be organized around the transformation, the transformative processes at work in the city and the local community, the very city where the university is located. And this, for me, points to a rather new relation between university and the city. And if you'd like, maybe you can say a few words about that vision and how you envision the future relationship between university and city in this way.
Yeah, I mean, oh, so this is Uwe, not me, yeah?
Yeah.
No problem. but it's the same starting point that Carrie showed to us. Understanding this climate change issue as a civilization process, as a great transformation, gives us the question, what does it mean for the organization of universities that are organized around disciplines that have their campuses that very often separated from real life? And if that what we really have to understand how to organize such kind of transformation processes, then we need a complete new idea of the university campus of the future. It should be the space where the transformation takes place and where our understanding of transformation processes is organized around. So, and this has a lot to do with an idea that came up over the last 10 years, thinking in real world laboratories. So we have in our traditional science, the laboratory plays a very important role for doing good science, but we haven't transferred it to understanding transformation processes, because you don't have controlled conditions when going in a real lab in a city where the transformation is taking place, the mobility shift, the energy transformation, the way we live in our cities. But if we only have our traditional approach, staying beside, looking what is happening, then it's very difficult to really understand societal transformation processes, because this needs a long time. It can only be understood afterwards. And we need a complete new role of science that is intervening by itself, is triggering transformation processes, and by this is enhancing the knowledge of science, but also of the actors that are involved in these transformation processes. Science becomes embedded and is a reflexivity booster for societies that have to learn to deal with these transformation processes. And this was an idea with the experience of the pandemic, seeing that the traditional university is nearly functioning in a digital space when it's only about knowledge transfer. Mm-hmm. And using this as a chance to using the city as a campus and organizing all the traditional knowledge transfer around it about the interesting questions we have to answer when really bringing forward the transformation processes. And I think this is very closely linked to what I think Kerry is motivating in her perspective as well, and makes clear it's not only about making better climate research, it's about redefining and reinventing the universities in the 21st century.
Okay, thanks a lot. And I found that striking too, that there were so many similarities between the ideas you're putting forward. And maybe we start with this idea of how teaching can use the place of the city and the local community. And you mentioned, and this is especially relevant today in this year where we haven't seen much face-to-face and on-site teaching at universities, neither in the UK nor in Germany, I'd say. And lots of people are thinking about whether this will last, whether this will have a lasting effect, whether we will see more digital teaching, more online teaching in the future. And there's a lot of benefits and a lot of positive things to be said about online teaching, I'm sure. But I like the idea and this phrase that you coined of ortsgebundene Lehre, that has a beautiful sound in German. It's place-bound teaching, and there can be there can be special value for teaching, which is in a more profound way interconnected with the city and resonates with the city, than just teaching that you can equally move online. So I wonder, and I find, and similar ideas were put forward in your report, Kerry. I found similar ideas, and so maybe I don't know who'd like to start on this. Maybe Uwe, you say something about this idea and what that would mean in practice. What would teaching, climate change related teaching look like, with special relevance to the place and the city and the community?
So perhaps the fascinating starting point is the idea when taking the about 25,000 students we have in Wuppertal. If every one of these students would invest one of his or her years in being a student in Wuppertal into transformation work within the city and combining it with acquainting the knowledge that is needed to better understand these transformation processes. And it's worthwhile for engineer who will care about technological problems, about the social scientist who is intervening in the city society, about the educational students that try to improve the educational processes. Then you would bring in fascinating power within the city. Now you really have the brain power of 25,000 people in the best years that really have a lot of energy and helping to transform the city on the one hand. And on the other hand, it's much more worthwhile kind of learning, because it's a transformative learning that is not only a cognitive learning, it is experiencing myself in transformation processes, in team constellations, in understanding different worldviews, and also finding by it much more easier my disciplinary identity, to understand what I do understand better by being an engineer, by being a social scientist, but at the same time see what other forms of knowledge contribute to solve a very complex problem. So the hypothesis is this kind of organizing learning would be a tremendous benefit for the cities, and it would be a tremendous benefit for our learning and for acquiring transformational skills in the 21st century. So this is a starting point, but we are still far away from universities really going this way.
I mean, I second all of this. I mean, I think one of the things that it's worth us thinking about is really what is it that's distinctive about a university, and what can it offer? And the phrase that you used there a minute ago was reflexivity booster, which I think is a really nice phrase, because what we're not suggesting is that universities become the city. So the university and the city are different things, but the point is that they ought to be able to work together. And one of the ways that they can work together is precisely around that bringing together of different expertise and saying what's going on here and how might we do it differently. And that to me is a kind of critical function of the university, is not to just be the community or be society, but to be the space where we reflect on what we're doing in our world. So I think there's just that nuance there. It's not just about making universities more relevant. It's actually about universities being the kind of space that we interrogate how the hell do we deal with these transformations we're going to need. The other thing is the real world is really complicated, which is fantastic for students, because it means you actually can't just be an engineer, and you can't be just an artist, and you can't just be an educator, because you have to deal with the messy reality that the world doesn't come in disciplines. And so you then have to work with other people, and you have to learn from other people. And you also learn to realize that cities have expertise and knowledge that you don't have. So one of the critical things that universities can do is they can learn from everybody in the city. There are people with huge amounts of knowledge. So it's not just about the university transforming the city, it is about the city also transforming the university, bringing different sorts of knowledge in. But it is about creating, I think there's something quite important about recognizing the university as a public space for democratic interrogation of where we want to go in the future. So it is a special place, but it is a special place that can play a different role in the city. And finally, your point on what students get out of this. For too long, we have thought that university education is just about what happens up here, that it's a cognitive practice. We have to be supporting our students to work with their hearts and to work with their hands as well as with their heads. And that's the point at which they connect with the world, that they're able to bring themselves as whole people. And again, this is where I think we in universities have really not been helping our students, because there are huge challenges to becoming a grown-up today. What does it mean to be an adult? These are questions that are emotional, they're embodied, they're physical, they're not just cognitive. And universities really should be a space where we can address all of those things. And really that work in partnership with cities, dealing with their messy complexity, having to deal with each other, is a really fantastic way of doing that. Yeah. We should just do this tomorrow.
Yeah, let's. So thanks a lot. And I just want to carry what you just said. It reminded me of this phrase you use in your report, and I like that a lot. So I'm just going to say it. It's universities as critical infrastructures. And I like this idea of these institutions as critical. I mean, it's critical infrastructures, it's infrastructures, but it's critical. And at some point you also use the word critical hope. So when you put this together, that universities provide as infrastructures critical hope, that's really a nice way of seeing universities. So we've got two questions, I think. Two people. We've got one question in the Q&A section, and if I see that correctly, one person wanting to ask one via video. I'm just going to read the one from the chat first, and it's from Hardy Schmitz, and it reads, 100% agree to getting involved in the city as a lab. What do you think about linking this to scientifically accompanied pilot projects for new technology, mostly introduced by startups? This would need a major shift in public procurement. So any one of you who would like to answer this, to say something about this?
Can you elaborate a little bit more? I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
This would go to Hardy Schmitz. If you're here, you want to elaborate your question? Otherwise, we'll just wait. Or you can type in an elaboration of your question, and I would bring one other participant on the stage. Now you can say something. It's Sabrina Frühauf. You can now say something. I can also, if you like to, I can also put you on screen. Let's see if this works. This is technology at its limits, I'd say.
We're all learning. This is all good.
This has been 1 year of learning experiences.
Yeah.
Definitely. We all became experts. So it's a kind of this transdisciplinary learning as well. So it's really fascinating how whole societies got up with such a digital literacy. You would have never expected that people besides you would ever use these kinds of technological tools. So it makes possible what dimension of learning is possible in within societies, even if it's sometimes not functioning yet.
I think, Sabrina, do you want to ask a question? You
no.
have a question. Okay, that's okay. That's fine. So I'll put you back. Now I have to find you again in this list. So
while you're doing that, yeah, I mean, I'd like to pick up on this digital and then the civic, because one of the things that I think the digital shift over the last year is beginning to allow us to do is to think about transformation that happens locally, but that can be networked very rapidly internationally. And so it gets rid of this kind of old idea that you can either only work locally or at a kind of global level through the UN. And it starts suggesting that we're able to network together. And again, this is very interesting for students, you know, because it starts raising the possibility of students being able to work in a particular place, addressing particular challenges, but being networked with people around the world who are doing the same sort of thing. And that, to me, I think is probably going to change the landscape of questions about whether students will actually travel. Will they continue to fly around the world to do these sorts of things? Or will we start seeing more local-based collective learning that networks people internationally? I think there's some really interesting questions coming out of this digital landscape, particularly in relation to climate issues.
Absolutely. I think that makes my role shift so interesting. On the one hand, I'm completely locally absorbed. Being a mayor of a city means a complete local focus. And on the other hand, it's possible to be in such a video chat and share the experience of how local transformation is blocked, how you can bring it forward, and have the chance to discuss these issues with leading scientists in the field, with other mayors. And this makes it so much interesting, even for people coming from science, going now in these local involvement. I think we have with a lot of students, a lot of people feel the fascination because being locally involved does not mean that your national and international interconnectedness is finished by it. So you can really combine it. And for me, it's also a very interesting experience.
And what's your expectation with, you mentioned this, what's your expectation with regard to international travel? I mean, researchers have been, I mean, Carrie, you just came from France, you said, and you were in Sweden before, and research was based before the pandemic heavily on international travel. You had all these conferences, and they were not for nothing. It was important to meet people, to establish trust, to get to know each other. And this all shifted to the online world once the pandemic started. So do you think once we're all vaccinated, it will be taken up as it was before, or we're going to see a larger something going to last from this shift, and will we have less international travel? Does science work without international travel and physical mobility?
Well, I mean, we have to remember there is a history to intellectual encounters that did not rely on aeroplanes. Okay, you know, people were historically in the past able to communicate. I mean, we have the old European idea of the Republic of Letters. People wrote each other letters, for goodness sake. You know, some of the greatest breakthroughs in history have happened in this sort of way. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't ever travel anywhere. One of the things that we do with the Zennström Initiative is everybody travels by train. And I have to say, I have never had better thinking time than a 2-day train journey from France to Sweden. It's great because you can't be on your emails and you actually have to think. So I think it's time for us to be starting to ask the questions, when do we need to do this, and what other modes are there of interacting with each other? But I am slightly worried that the conversation around climate change in universities can become just about academic flights. This is such a tiny part of the issue. Student flights actually are much more of the carbon cost of universities than academic flights alone. However, if academics are going to take a lead on a transformational agenda, we have to recognise that we're part of the 10% that are producing 50% of the emissions, and we have to start asking the equity questions to ourselves. Is it acceptable that I would demand to have that carbon budget to emit when there are people elsewhere in the world who could really use it? So there are really profound ethical questions here, and I think this is a really great moment for us to start examining them.
If you bring up, and let's stick with this for a minute, and then I'm gonna get to the other question. If you say that there's much more carbon dioxide produced by the flights that students actually take, and I know universities are very keen to keeping international students, international mobility, and we very much regret that the UK has just dropped out of the Erasmus scheme. And you know, there's ways to get from the UK to Germany by not taking a plane, but there's many other countries where actually you have to take a plane. So where does this leave student mobility, international student mobility? How do you said it was an ethical question. Do you have any answer, any idea about that?
I think it's an incredibly complicated question, not least because so many European and American universities have now become financially dependent on international student travel. So we have a real question ourselves to work through. Personally, I would rather see us moving towards a different model of international partnership with local universities in different places so that people aren't required to travel as much as they do. So that would be the first thing. Secondly, I think we can have a different conversation with our students. So one of my PhD students, for example, a few years ago, she was flying 8 times a year from the UK to the US because her partner was on the west coast of America. Okay, so not all student travel is absolutely essential. So I think really fundamentally we have to be asking ourselves this question. I would also be asking governments questions, which is, do they really believe that the research capacity of their countries should be dependent on students flying there from other countries? Or do we not think that universities should be fully and effectively funded in ways that don't make them so vulnerable in this way? The other issue is we are neglecting our local students, we're neglecting low-income students, we're neglecting universities can become engines of reproduction of inequality. And one of the ways in which they do that is by shipping in international students. One of the things I say in this report is that I think it's time for us to refocus on those students that we've been ignoring for years and years. Older students, students that need to transition from high carbon industries to low carbon industries. There is huge potential for us to create educational offerings to students from different backgrounds without having to fly in, frankly, reasonably affluent students from all around the rest of the world.
This is fascinating, because it becomes clear that what it would actually, that this would actually mean a major shift of the business universities are doing today, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, where universities are relying, as you pointed out, on money provided by international students coming physically to the country, mostly. And this would the university landscape would look very, very different.
Yeah, but it's only been this way for a short period of time. I mean, we have a very bad habit of thinking that the way things are now is the way they've always been. Universities have changed massively in very short periods of time. They can change massively again, and we need to remember that. And we need to think about, what do we think universities are for? What are their value? What is their real role in society? And as far as I'm concerned, their job is not simply to be producing students for high income jobs to, you know, massively increase global consumption. That's not what they're for.
I think it would prolong the duration of stays at the universities. No? So I think the most effective instrument would be just a quite relevant CO2 tax on flights as well. No? So then you value it completely different. No? So you really think about the value it has for your development, for your relationships, no? And so I think it wouldn't be the end of traveling, but it would be a more reflective form of using flights in the future. No?
So we have related to this discussion about student mobility. We have a question here in the chat, which is extremely interesting, I think. And it's earlier you had the focus on what universities can offer students. How about turning this around and thinking about what students bring into the universities? What is the role of students in transforming universities, and how could it be strengthened, and how could the unique skills be welcomed more into higher education? And I think this question both resonates with aspects you mentioned earlier. Whoever would like to start commenting on that question, I think it's a very brilliant question.
Yeah, I think the students have the questions, and what the problem of the university of today is that universities have a lot of answers to questions nobody asks anymore. And so bringing in students now in the driver's seat again means really making the question that is driving the students to the base of the knowledge generation that has to be produced in universities. I know it from my discipline, economics isn't answering the questions the young active students have. They want to know how to transform economy. How can we more put in focus the common? Is something possible, like a degrowth economy? How could it function? How to organize it? No? What is this private capital? What kind of shifts are needed? These are all the questions that the young people see when they look at the world and see that inequalities and a lot of problems arise with the existing economic system. And what they get at the university are just explanations why the system is why it is and why it has to be in the way they have they find it here, and making the questions of the students to the driver of university education would change a lot in a transforming world.
And I love that idea. And so one of the reasons that I was working at Uppsala was because of an initiative that was set up 25 years ago at the university, where a bunch of students went to the Vice Chancellor and they said, this university isn't teaching us anything important about the world. And The Vice-Chancellor at that point said, well, you're right, he said, and I'm going to give you some money and resource, and you can design your own courses. So there has been there at that university for 25 years an experiment where students act as course coordinators. They define the issues that they want to learn about, and then they bring in experts around the world to help teach on that program. So we've got some examples in different places that we could look at as to how we might organize that. The way I prefer to think about it is actually of a meeting point. So it's not about teachers leading, nor is it just about students being the only ones to set the agenda. I think it's about creating a point of connection, a point of dialogue and debate. Gert Biester, the educational philosopher, talks about the beautiful risk of education, which I think is a wonderful phrase. And, you know, we're not just looking at us getting what we want, either as teachers or students. We're about creating a moment of encounter and experiment where something new can emerge that we didn't envisage in the first place. And again, that ties into our partnerships in cities and the experimental approach. Because frankly, right now, we need new ideas and different ways of thinking that we don't already have. And we'll get that once we kind of collide these different sets of knowledge and expertise. So it's a great question, Anna. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And your answer to that question is directly bringing us to another question asked in the Q&A. And this is, if you could give an example of a joint city civic and university approach to at scale climate action. Universities in Glasgow, and I'm guessing, Roddy, you're from Glasgow or somewhere around, are helping Glasgow city and region to mitigate and adapt, and with people at the center, but we need good examples to share learning. So if you know, and I'm sure you do, I'm pretty confident that you know examples of how, what universities and cities can do together. Maybe you can give one of these examples, point to some working models for this civic approach. I don't know who would like to start.
Yeah, I think what is quite important when bringing in the university and the city is, on the one hand, the knowledge side. So we have a lot of projects thinking about car-free in the cities, or how to make the city really carbon neutral, and developing technological scenarios. It is the one thing to bring in the knowledge. Very often the knowledge is already existing with the people that were in the responsibility to move the things on. But by the university having a very specific role in the societal discourse, they are allowed to dare to say truths and things that are not allowed to be said by politicians and other groups, because it's directly integrated in the classical discourse and conflict schemes. So with the university coming into the debate brings in a really complete new player that helps us to discuss about new perspectives, to be this critical infrastructure, to ask questions. Why doesn't has happened this for 20 or 25 years? A question nobody else is daring to ask anymore, because he knows about the routines and the processes to keep these voices low. And so it's very important to see both aspects. And so for me, it was a very interesting experience having a city here in Wuppertal that really had the courage to elect scientists as mayor of a city, because this was a will in the city society to have somebody who speaks the truth to them, not the truth how really to do it, but to say things that haven't been said in the traditional political process before anymore. No? And so I think these both roles are quite important when looking at the interaction of universities and cities.
I think that's so important. The democratic space and function of the university is absolutely central. Is it okay, Anne, if I come?
Yes, please go on.
So there's two things really there. One of them is that I think universities can also act on behalf of communities that have not historically had a voice in local settings. So, you know, there is the possibility for academics to speak on behalf of those who've been marginalized or excluded in the public space. That to me feels like an important role. But to go to the question about examples, the one that I find really powerful is the Commonwealth programme, which is looking at how anchor organisations generally in cities can play a role in rethinking the economics of a city. So if we look at what's going on in Cleveland and in Preston and in a lot of places around the world, we see universities playing a role in their cities where they understand the contributions of their financial power as well as their intellectual power. So they are reviewing how they purchase, they're reviewing who they're purchasing from, they're looking at their supply chains, they're making sure that they've got local provision. They're also looking at their assets, they're looking at their investments. So rather than simply investing money, for example, in oil companies where you may get the higher return, they're asking what are the social and the environmental impacts of the financial assets that we have as an institution, and how can we invest those for the social good of the city, but perhaps also more widely. So those are also the sorts of things that I think we want to be thinking about. And in terms of examples, I think the Commonwealth programme is really, really worth looking at as a kind of integrated citywide approach that's looking at how many of the different anchor institutions in a city can work together.
This is, I wanted to maybe a follow-up to things both of you said, and shifting the focus of the discussion a bit towards the, I mean, after all, we're a political organization, we do political work, and the question of where comes politics and policy into this. And Uwe, you mentioned that you're an experiment, in a way, your career is an experiment in itself by switching the role of becoming from a year-long, decades-long researcher in the field of transformation studies to a mayor that actually has at least some powers to support and foster transformative processes. What's your experience? Do you think there's is your approach of doing things different from classical political careers, and would you recommend the experiment of electing scientists for political offices, maybe in other places too?
Jan, it's a very interesting question, because one part is connected to an identity being scientist before, and changing sides now help me to understand much better why I came up with science at the end, because always being interested in different forms of knowledge and of different forms of perspectives, I think what was a driver for me, and understanding that here you really have this very fascinating parallels between democracy, as Carrie mentioned, and science, because both are driven by the trust that there is this specific power of the better argument. No? So that is a trust and the confidence we have when organizing our societies as democracies, because we believe that there is something that helps us to interconnect with the power of the better argument, and not by physical power. No? So that is the driver, this confidence in the better argument, that it's on the base of democracies, and it's the same in the scientific system. So it's a system where only the power of the better argument counts. No? And when now asking myself what I'm doing different, my experience at the end, after having left the university and the institute, is you're not becoming the better manager just by being scientist. Afterwards, you're better understanding why you failed. No? But being a good manager or leader or city mayor needs other capabilities that are essential, and you can't replace them just by thinking about it. So you have to feel that these ingredients are in you and are motivating you. So I wouldn't suggest to any scientist now become mayor or become university president. There have to be other motivations in your personality that drive you to do this. But this reflexivity helps you to deal with new situations and to better understand your failing, to correct these faults, and by being this, having a little bit more agility in the best case. No? But so at the end, you could say I was ever a deep Democrat, and I just had a little pathway within science, but now I'm back in the democratic sphere a little, in some regard.
Yeah, so I find that interesting, because what you're saying is, what I understood is that democracy and science have certain things in common, especially the striving for the better argument, but nonetheless they're separate realms, and what makes you successful in the realm of science doesn't translate to the world of politics. And so that also means that there's this debate on follow the science and listen to the science, and that it's not enough to just listen to the science. Should be an important prerequisite for successful politics, but it's not enough to listen to the science, but you have to, politics is an art in itself, and you need different approaches and different skills to be successful in politics. Is this something you're saying?
Absolutely, it's exactly to the point.
And sticking with politics for a bit, Carrie, in your report, you bring up this idea of a moonshot program for making universities carbon neutral, I think by 2035. Can you say something what the whole idea of the moonshot program is, and what will it mean to the project of making universities carbon neutral?
I will do. I will also introduce, we've talked about science and politics, but actually what I think is missing in most of our discussion about transformation is also arts and imagination and emotion and hope. So God help us if we're only going to be run by the scientists and the politicians, all right? We also need the other skills. And this is really important, because we mustn't suggest that universities or our public sphere can only be governed by evidence and politics. It is a much, much messier and complicated process, and we need to have visions and hopes for the future, all right? So the arts matters, imagination matters, creativity matters. Okay, so that's that. So tied into this question of the moonshot, the critical issue is we need a serious long-term, we need a serious goal to aim for. Talking to my colleagues, who are the ones that I turn to, who are doing all the work on the carbon budgets, both at Manchester and the Tyndall Centre and at Uppsala, it's very clear that aiming simply for net zero by 2050 is not going to get us anywhere near where we need to get. So my general strategy would be that we set ourselves the ambitious target that we need to, which is 0 by 2035, which is hugely fast, and it's very, very soon. But once we've set ourselves this, let's imagine what that might look like and work backwards. And at that point, what we do is we've got a massive creative challenge of how we might start envisaging that. And at that point, we don't know how to do it now. You know, it's not complicated. We're not sure how to do it now. So the point is that we then start bringing together the different sets of expertise that we have in the cities, in the universities, across the different agendas. And we really start rapidly experimenting and then rapidly learning. This is not a situation where you hold on to your knowledge. It's going to be one where we have to share it with each other. So that's the point. We need an ambitious, creative, imaginative goal to aim for. And I think if universities can demonstrate that they can do it, and I include our transport emissions in that 2035 figure, then you know, we are setting the lead, we're setting an agenda, and we're demonstrating to people that we're working out how to start achieving these sorts of goals.
What would be, I mean, you want to say, you want to respond to that? Or?
Yeah, I like this perspective very much. 3 years ago at the Wuppertal Institute, we created the notion of Zukunftskunst, no? That is the art of designing the future. And in German, the notion of Kunst is quite interesting because it's integrating this aspect of art and of craft. No? So it's both a little bit. So it's on the one hand, understanding all the ingredients of transformation processes and combining it in a intelligent way, the technological, the economics, the social, the cultural aspects. And on the other hand, art is exactly this, what is for creativity, for thinking beyond rational aspects, integrating emotions, giving us a language to such aspects like hope and emotions, and making clear that the knowledge that is needed to design future also needs this very broad knowledge base. No? And it's quite interesting that it has a lot of resonance, this notion of Zukunftskunst, and it's a little bit what I'm experiencing now when being in such a city context. No? So you have to feel where are the transformative energies. No? That has to do with people, with traditions, with emotions that can be activated, with resistance that is very strong, and you feel that you can't overcome it, that you have to take a detour, that you have to try and combine new alliances. And this broader approach to knowledge that is really needed to bring forward transformation, and that is quite important to integrate it also in university education, not to make the students clear that are so different forms of knowledge that have to be experienced to be somebody who has an orientation for this 21st century.
And I think we know that, so all the work that we've done on sort of psychology of climate change and denial, we know that there is socially organized denial, and that emerges from the sense that there is nothing to be done. And one of the critical ways of addressing that, precisely the art of organizing hope, is to create visions that people can aim for, but also opportunities for people to work together so that they know that they're not on their own. And this is one of the real challenges. I think we need to create the opportunity so that those people that have the energy and the desire can find each other, can connect up with each other, and can begin to collaborate together. And that's why, you know, a national government should be supporting something like a national moonshot program, because it acts as a catalyst for people to be able to find each other. And in these circumstances, those of us who are trying to do this work have to be able to find each other.
We're approaching the end of this discussion sooner than I expected, I have to say. And there's a lot of questions, I think, remaining, but just one last question for each of you, and this is, if you could change one thing, or you could have, if there was one, this is not the one wish, you have one wish, but if there's one thing, you mentioned the power of doing things and of changing the imagination towards climate change, of getting out of this feeling, being trapped. You can't do anything about it, and you're overwhelmed. And if there's one thing you would change, and you could change in the way that universities are doing their business today and are connecting with the city, what would that thing be? Where would you start? Just one.
Yeah. I think it's always starting by so to see this, what Carrie just put in a wonderful picture, no? That there is a kind of self-efficacy, and you can join with others and try to really bring it forward, because the world isn't changed by wishes, it's changed by joint action. No? So if you come into the situation that you think only a wish can help you to design future, then you already have a problem. So my wish would be that this wish, to have a wish, is very fast gone, and I will find people to take action by myself.
That's an excellent answer, I have to say. Carrie.
I think it would be remembering that now is not everything we have, that the present that we're in is not always the way it has been, that things have been different in the past, and they changed precisely because, as Uri says, groups of people got together, organized, lobbied, worked, did the business that was needed to be done to make changes, and that therefore futures can also be different. And I think I would love to see those academics that are leading organizations begin to remember that they have more power than they think, and that they also have more responsibility than they think. And I think if they can understand both of those things, there is a chance that if they work together, we might be able to achieve the sorts of changes that we need.
This is pretty much the idea of perfect closing remarks, I would say, for this discussion. And we've got 2 more questions, but we're running out of time. We're taking note of these questions and get back to you about this, if that's okay with the participants who have asked these questions. So, and it's 6 p.m. We've been doing this for an hour. It's been an incredible hour. I've learned so much. I've enjoyed this so much. And thanks a lot to both of you for sharing your ideas and your thoughts and taking the time for us. And I hope that this discussion can serve both as an inspiration and an encouragement to think more extensively about what cities and universities can do together in order to tackle climate change. Thank you all very much, and I hope to see everyone, or at least some of the people attending this at some point in person, and have a nice evening. Bye, everyone.
Very much. Goodbye. Goodbye.
So, and I'm gonna